The smaller the planets are, they are, other things being equal, of so much the greater density, for so the powers of gravity on their several surfaces come nearer to equality. They are likewise, other things being equal, of the greater density, as they are nearer to the Sun. Absolute space, in its own nature, without regard to anything external, remains always similar and immovable. Relative space is some movable dimension or measure of the absolute spaces, which our senses determine by its position to bodies, and which is vulgarly taken for immovable space. It may be that there is no such thing as an equable motion, whereby time may be accurately measured. All motions may be accelerated or retarded, but the true, or equable, progress of absolute time is liable to no change. It is reasonable that forces directed toward bodies depend on the nature and the quantity of matter of such bodies, as happens in the case of magnetic bodies. We are to admit no more causes of natural things than such as are both true and sufficient to explain their appearances. The ancients considered mechanics in a twofold respect, as rational, which proceeds accurately by demonstration, and practical. To practical mechanics all the manual arts belong, from which mechanics took its name. God in the beginning formed matter in solid, massy, hard, impenetrable, movable particles, of such sizes and figures, and with such other properties, and in such proportion to space, as most conduce to the end for which he formed them. Resistance is usually ascribed to bodies at rest, and impulse to those in motion, but motion and rest, as commonly conceived, are only relatively distinguished, nor are those bodies always truly at rest, which commonly are taken to be so. God is a relative word and has a respect to servants, and deity is the dominion of God, not over his own body, as those imagine who fancy God to be the soul of the world, but over servants. Hypotheses should be subservient only in explaining the properties of things but not assumed in determining them, unless so far as they may furnish experiments. Why there is one body in our system qualified to give light and heat to all the rest, I know no reason but because the author of the system thought it convenient, and why there is but one body of this kind, I know no reason, but because one was sufficient to warm and enlighten all the rest. That the divided but contiguous particles of bodies may be separated from one another is a matter of observation, and, in the particles that remain undivided, our minds are able to distinguish yet lesser parts, as is mathematically demonstrated. The same thing is to be understood of all bodies, revolved in any orbits. They all endeavor to recede from the centers of their orbits, and were it not for the opposition of a contrary force which restrains them to and detains them in their orbits, which I therefore call centripetal, would fly off in right lines with a uniform motion. In the beginning of the year 1665, I found the method of approximating series and the rule for reducing any dignity of any binomial into such a series. The motions of the comets are exceedingly regular, and they observe the same laws as the motions of the planets, but they differ from the motions of vortices in every particular and are often contrary to them. Just as the system of the sun, planets, and comets is put in motion by the forces of gravity, and its parts persist in their motions, so the smaller systems of bodies also seem to be set in motion by other forces and their particles to be variously moved in relation to each other and, especially, by the electric force. If the experiments which I urge be defective, it cannot be difficult to show the defects, but if valid, then by proving the theory, they must render all objections invalid. It is indeed a matter of great difficulty to discover, and effectually to distinguish, the true motions of particular bodies from the apparent, because the parts of that immovable space, in which those motions are performed, do by no means come under the observation of our senses. The hypothesis of matters being at first evenly spread through the heavens is, in my opinion, inconsistent with the hypothesis of innate gravity without a supernatural power to reconcile them, and therefore, it infers a deity.